Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for a Sober in Seattle podcast again. And we are going to be talking about Step 3 with Steve and Nancy. And hopefully you've listened to Steps 1 and Steps 2 that posted in January and February, respectively. And you're following along with the great wisdom and information that Steve and Nancy are passing along to us. So we are going to talk about Step 3. Thanks for joining us, Steve and Nancy.
Well, thank you, Lara, again for the invitation. And so I'm the Steve part of the Steve and Nancy.
Yes.
And here's a take on Step 3, which of mine that has grown over the years in AA. In the beginning, it didn't mean too much to me. I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. And I couldn't even read the step correctly because I always interjected God as I understood him. So a little bit of background on that. What Step 3 as part of Chapter 5 actually says is, here are the steps we took, which will hopefully be helpful to us. And what they wrote about in the book, I came to find, was how they understood God. And in no way were they saying I should change my conception at all, or even have a conception. They were just sharing how they understood God. And so after I'd been in AA a while, and deep down, Step 3, I could never tell anybody, oh yes, I've turned my will and my life over to the care of God with any kind of truthfulness, because it was just more of a concept to me than something I could put into practice in my life. So the first thing, the idea of God as they understood God, I was asked, Stephen, did you read the book to see how did they understand God? Again, not in any way attacking my conceptions. They just shared their own conception. And I remember I said, what? And he said, did you ever read the book to see what their conception of God was? And if you did, was their conception helpful to you? And I'd never been presented with those questions before, so it was kind of interesting to see how did they understand God. And again, there's no attack on my conceptions or even a suggestion. It was just how they understood God. If I saw how they did, was it helpful to me? And the answer was just all capitalized with bold italics, yes. It was very helpful when I looked at it in that perspective. Geez, how did they do it? How did they understand God? Okay, so the first part of Step 3, made a decision. Again, I was asked, why did I feel a need to make a decision? I mean, what's wrong with just life the way it was? I stopped drinking, first half of Step 1. I admitted my life was unmanageable, second part of Step 1. And Step 2, came to believe that there's a power that could restore me to sanity. Again, there's no need to be restored to sanity unless I can see that I'm insane. And so that was a little bit difficult because now that I wasn't drinking and I was going to AA, in my mind, that should equal sanity, but it didn't. It equaled no consequences from drinking anymore, but many consequences from the rest of my life. So at first it was almost on an experimental nature, that could there be a power that's greater than the one I've been using to live my life by, and the result or the consequences of that would be a much better life. And I kind of had to chuckle because there couldn't be a worse one. And so I saw, especially through others, that when they trusted this different guide, this higher power, this spirit of the universe, this inner teacher, whatever words we want to use to describe it, and became aware of and followed some spiritual laws, that their lives were very different than mine. And I also got to see that it was predictable how their lives would turn out, meaning happy, joyous, abundant, and just at peace. That was a predictable consequence of following a higher power, or the spirit of the universe, whatever we want to call it. Just as it was predictable that I would continue to have problems over this, problems over that, resentments over this, just what I would call a typical normal life, just trying to solve some problems, and hopefully things would just get better. And they did get better, because I wasn't drinking and I met new friends in AA and I was involved. But it wasn't that life of peace that I wanted. And when it was presented to me, and I was shown many, many passages in the book about the predictability of how your life would look by following a higher. Sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry, there's a little distraction on the screen for a second. Okay, so wrapping it up, so Nancy has a chance. This decision, I got to see that I needed to make a decision if I wanted my life to be different. And the decision was going to be, it was easier for me to contemplate alignment with spiritual laws than it was like turning it over to God. Just a somatic thing, but the end result's exactly the same. There's no difference. It just was a lot easier for me. And one of the aspects of God, because I've come to find out that if you're trying to be in alignment with any aspect of God, you're in alignment with all of them. Anyway, that made sense and still makes sense to me. And the one I was introduced to first was kindness. That, like Stephen, in your conception, is God kind? And I would say, well, of course. And then the next logical step was, is he unkind? And I said, well, of course not. I couldn't picture God being kind and unkind. So what if, Stephen, what if you turned your life over to always trying to react in the kindest way possible in every situation? And that's really what step 3 was asking of me, the way I understand it, and being consciously in alignment with a spiritual law. We practice these principles or laws in all our affairs. I could see where my life was, as I'm witnessing it, dramatically changed and quickly. And like the drinking part, we come into AA and quit drinking. I found that, how do you do this step 3 thing? And I would project all sorts of potential circumstances in the future, but it turned out just like the drinking thing. How about just for today? Or if that's too much, how about for the next hour? And so I got to see also how AA slogans can be so helpful. Okay, anyway, I want to hear from Nancy.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And hello, everybody. Boy, I could really track with everything that you said in going from, step 1 and, getting into AA and being driven here under the lash of alcoholism and finding that it wasn't just not drinking that was going to be our solution, because we weren't drinking. In fact, we didn't drink for the first 3 years we were in AA, and things did not get better. They got better in the sense that I definitely felt better. I felt physically better. I was sleeping at night and not waking up, needing more alcohol. So I physically, I felt better, but mentally and emotionally, I was not better. And sometimes that would keep me up at night as well. And so coming to believe that I could be helped, I even struggled with that. I paused over that, just because, as I see it now, so much, unworthiness, like I'm not deserving of help. I had to have a little help getting over that by just accepting that it was true for me too. And then getting to step 3, made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. That also gave me a lot of pause, probably because, I wasn't too sure, I didn't see it this way then, but I was used to playing God in my own life and wasn't sure that I wanted to turn that over. But as our ABCs say on page 60, that if I'm convinced that I'm alcoholic and can't manage, that no human power could have, and that God could and would if he were sought, if I was convinced of that, then I could make a decision. And I do also love that italics that you pointed out, Stephen, as we understood him, meaning that because as I understood God, as I've spoken here before, as I understood God, unbeknownst to me, because I wouldn't have thought it was this, but underneath in my subconscious, I had a very destructive and untrue conception of God. Even in Bill's story where he says, he stood in the presence of infinite power and love, that wasn't my conception, but that is how they understood God, as infinite power and love. So as you pointed out, that is like a great benchmark to say, hey, maybe my conception's wrong, and I'd rather have that conception than the one I've been carrying around. And as we, I think, page 62 in our big book is one of the most read and talked about and beloved pages, because it talks about how this selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of our problem, and that we're driven by 100 forms of fear. There's a lot of disguises in this mind of mine that fear can hide, and that they kind of lay it out for us, above everything, we have to be rid of this selfishness. And that always made me feel so bad. Another reason to feel bad about myself. Oh, I'm so selfish. It's the root of me, this selfishness. And that suffix ish kind of captured my attention. And I looked it up, and, ish, it means belonging to, right? If I say, oh, they're babyish, or that's reddish, it belongs to the nature of red or the nature of a baby. And so selfish kind of became, it belongs to the self, the false self, which I have completely listened to and took direction from, thinking it was from my better mind, but or the one that was looking out for me, but being convinced that my life had become unmanageable and that maybe I was wrong about that as well, then I could see that maybe this small self, this false self, or this ego, it was not the best guide, but I didn't know how to listen to anything else. And this page, it takes us into that. Well, yes, you don't know how, because you believe that this false self, this extreme selfishness, you believe that is you. So how can you get rid of it if you believe it's you? That's why they say, I had to have God's help. And part of that was going to be looking that I needed to stop playing God. I needed to quit playing God. And how did that look in my life? And even that, over the course of the years became more and more clear, because I had a very clever way of hiding all of that from myself, hiding those subtle ways of, such as, I know how things should be. I'm right about it. The way I think about this is right. Well, that's playing God, because I don't know. And they give us some simple examples, that God's the principal, He's the Father, He's the new employer. I had an image in my mind of when I worked, and there was a boss in the office, and if the boss walked around the floor and gave people directions, I would never follow the boss and give people different directions. I wouldn't do that. I would be listening to the boss. I'd be like, this is what the boss says. So this chapter in How It Works goes on to say, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. And then these third step promises, which I have come to see, we need these promises by making this decision to turn our will and our life over. As many of you who are listening have probably heard, that decision is also a decision to launch into an inventory. And launch means to vigorously, leap into an inventory. And we are graced with these promises in the third step that He will provide what we need. The courage to go on with this fourth step. We'll become less and less interested in ourselves. I'll be less interested in my plans, my designs, because I will be getting a view of them, a new view of them. I mean, step 3 is a decision to turn my thoughts and my actions over to the care of God. It is a continuous thing, right? It isn't made once on that day when you first say it with your sponsor. It is made hopefully daily, or when we notice that we are out of peace, that somehow I must have decided by myself what something means, that I'm right again, and that I know how things should be. It is a step in the beginning of establishing that relationship with God as they understood Him. Part of the promises says that we will lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter, and that we would be reborn. And this comes from seeing that false self that I've been centered on, which is self-centeredness, but I'm centered on a self that is not true, not wise, it is crazy. So it is maybe even a gradual relinquishment of this attachment to that self. And, so that's also why I think that decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God needs to be repeated many times, because if that false self values something very much, that decision needs to be repeated over and over. But that's okay. That's why it's there. And we have, again, we read the promises again, and we trust that we can write the inventory, do the 5th step, turn that over to the care of God, and to have that defect removed, meaning my faulty thinking. But this is a step. It's a step that's very active, right? It's a very active step. It isn't a one and done. It's a way of life. Okay, I'm done.
Well, thank you. So, and here comes Lara to ask her questions.
Did you guys straighten everybody out on step 3?
All I need to do is be straightened out myself.
Here's what I want to know about step 3. And maybe you guys talked about this already, but I sit in meetings and I hear people say, I do step 3 every day. And this is more semantics than anything else, but I was taught that when I do step 3, I immediately get up and start writing a step 4, because that's what the instructions in the book are. So maybe it's different. Maybe it's just the intention of, is step 3 I guess my question is step 3 something that you do every day? Is it more just a principle that you carry into your daily life of surrendering and having God be first in what you do and in your interactions? Or is step 3 more of a, like it doesn't have any real permanent effect unless followed by strenuous action, which is what the book says. What's your take on that?
Well, yes, of course, that's what the book says. In my experience, here 36 and a half years later, it's still very helpful to me to think, and not always, but I'd like to say the intentions on a daily basis is, do I need to make a decision? Is a decision even needed? And that's kind of me telling myself a joke, because if my life is manageable and I have sober thinking, correct thinking, so I'm happy, joyous, and free, and feel at peace and a sense of abundance and all that, that gas tank has to be filled with me often. And so I reaffirm I need to make this decision again, that following spiritual principles or spiritual laws is going to always bring me what I want. And the half measures, like, I'll call on God in this situation, but I'm got it covered over here real well. That's just old thinking, that as time goes by, I'm finding it less and less, but certainly not gone. Then as far as next we launched into step 4, I guess we'll talk about that next month. But the permanency of a step 3, I have found, of course, it's a launching pad in that respect to the rest of all the steps, let alone not just step 4. And I'll say this about that too, but probably talk about it more next month. In step 4, they use the word, when they made up step 4, fearless. And so if as we hear at meetings all the time about, people so afraid of step 4, it could be the foundation before step 4 can be looked at in a different way, so we're not entering step 4 filled with fear, which we would have to say is contrary to the step itself. And to do that, I noticed I needed a different perspective, which I didn't have. But I found through guidance, higher power, spirit, whatever we want to call it, it's available. And by myself, I was just one of the crowd that would talk about, oh man, I can't, I'm just filled with fear about actually writing this stuff down in a notebook. And I didn't get the contradiction. Well, it's not about sitting down filled with fear. So there has to be a way to do this that I hadn't come up with at the time, but where tens of thousands or millions or however many people are in AA, that I found a way to do this, correct, as the book suggested. And that's the way I wanted to find. And then once I saw that my way wasn't working, it was easy. I've always found help in AA whenever I asked. Somebody's always been there to help. Okay.
Yes.
You know, I myself, like, I don't sit down and read the third step prayer every morning, but I do have a better understanding of what a decision is, because if I'm deciding, if I don't decide, it will be decided for me. I could fall back into thinking I know. Again, I can easily fall back into playing God. I can fall back into interference or manipulation of circumstance. And I guess with enough experience, and our book promises that in step 11, that the occasional hunch becomes, and inspiration becomes a working part of the mind. And so there is growth in this program. And I'm not saying that it's not wise to read that prayer every day, because our problem is this bondage of self, right? Relieve me of the bondage of self. But hopefully I've begun to see that I'm not bound to that self. You know, that I can decide to join my will with God's. And that is where all the power is.
Stephen, I just have one question for you. How did you get so lucky as to have such an awesome life as Nancy?
Well, there's actually an answer to that.
Okay.
I needed the help. I needed the help of a fabulous teacher. And I got it.
It's one of the great gifts of turning your will and life over is Nancy.
As did I. As did I.
That's so great.
Well, thanks for having us here again, Lara.
I love having you guys here. I'm excited about this series of the steps with Steve and Nancy. There's a ring to it, isn't there? You guys are awesome. Thanks again. Well, we'll see you next month for step 4.
All right.
Okay.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye now.